So welcome everybody to this QUT Connections Forum for Bold Ideas. My name is Margaret Shield. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of QUT, but also for today, very importantly, I'm Chair of the Board of the Queensland Museum Network, which presents the World Science Festival, and this event today and other events where my two interests come together as we join together to bring you this event. I'm going to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on where we're meeting today, the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and play our Welcome to Country video.
Balka be Balka, welcome in the language of the Yagara people. We acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara peoples as the First Nation owners of the lands of where QUT now stands. For thousands of years, the Turrbal and Yagara people have gathered along the banks of Maiwa, the Brisbane River, to share their knowledge and stories. We pay our respects to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands where QUT now stands have always been places of teaching, researching, and learning. We acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within our QUT community. From Moreton Bay, inland as far as the Great Dividing Range near Warwick and Toowoomba, as far north as the Caboolture River, including the lands around Brisbane City, Meanjin. Yura yura yinala, balka bi balka, nganguru nguru maramakoro nganya birali, nganya bayam. Welcome to the traditional country of the Turrbal and Yagara people.
I'd also like to welcome and acknowledge a number of our guests this morning. So Dr Jim Thompson, CEO of the Queensland Museum, Distinguished Professor Christopher Barner-Kwolek, Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice President for Research at QUT, other members of the QUT Executive and the Museum Executive and the team from World Science Festival New York, and of course our special guest today, Dr Meganne Christian. Welcome back to Australia. It's great to have you here, and also welcome to our moderator Rebecca Livingston. And I know that you're starting early and finishing late, Rebecca, and we really appreciate you being with us today. So this Connections program, which we've joined together as with the museum as part of the World Science Festival for this particular event, is designed to bring bold ideas to our QUT community, to expose them to some of the greatest ideas and challenges of our time. And we do that by giving both our academics and academics and speakers from around the world opportunities to speak and share their ideas with that broader community, both our academic community and the general public. And this has been a flagship event we've developed to bring those thinkers and groundbreaking research to as wide an audience as possible. And with that end, we're live streaming today, and so we hope that some of you will be joining us online live, and there'll be other opportunities to catch up. We will have a Q&A session after we hear from Meg this morning, and that'll be, I guess, an opportunity for some of you to ask questions about what you're hearing, what you hear and what you see as some of the exciting challenges facing us. At QUT, we're really keen to bring bold ideas into action, and we've got many areas of activity, but in space we have a new 7.9 million QUT Space Technology Precinct led by Associate Professor Thierry Penot. This is the centrepiece of a precinct that's going to be a lunar test bed, and it'll be Australia's largest covered facility for testing field robotics and equipment in realistic moon conditions, and it's under construction at our Kelvin Grove campus, and hope to open and celebrate the opportunities that brings in the future. We also have the work of Associate Professor David Flannery, who's been looking at life on other planets as a long-term planner in charge of daily operations for NASA's Perseverance rover mission, and that work is also done in collaboration with a team in California, which has QUT alumni Abigail Alwood as a member and leader. And we also have many alumni working in the space industry. And there's no end of interest and fascination with all things to do with space, as we've seen by the response today, and particularly with engagement with schools and young people about science in our space activities and in today's event. And as I said, this event is part of also the 2024 World Science Festival Brisbane, which continues until Sunday, and there's tickets for many of different events. If you haven't yet taken advantage of that, please either pick up the program or engage with that online. And I thank both teams for partnering with this today. So delighted that we're being joined by Dr Meganne Christian, Reserve Astronaut with the European Space Agency, and I was delighted the other evening to discover a connection as she spent her schooling years in Wollongong, where I spent 20 years of my life, and also wonderful that your family could be here today to hear this talk. So we're really excited to hear about space. As I said, it's inspiring, and I'm not going to steal Rebecca's thunder by saying anything more about Meganne. I'll leave her to introduce her. I will say a little bit about Rebecca, though. She grew up in North Queensland and was sure her future lay in ballroom dancing or on a netball court, but she ended up in tourism and hotel management, and spent time overseas before studying journalism at QUT, so we're very proud of her as an alumna. And she's been at the ABC since 2005, producing and presenting everyday programs across the day, including breakfast drive, afternoons and weekends. And when she's not working, she found answering many questions from her little boys. I'm sure some of them are around space and science. So please welcome Rebecca to introduce today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. No such thing as early mornings or late nights. We're all on space time today. Actually, I don't even know if there's time in space, but Dr Meganne Christian will be able to reveal all in just a moment. I am thrilled to be here today, whether you're in the room or watching at home online. Special shout out to Liam and Matilda. Meganne will tell you about them in a moment. Before we invite Meganne to the stage, I just want to encourage you to share your experience at today's event on social media. You can use the hashtag QUTBold or WSFB 2024 for the World Science Festival. And in about 60 minutes, we'll be taking questions from you. So if you're watching Meganne this morning and you're thinking, I want to know about XYZ, you can submit your question via the QR code that's displayed on the screen right now. So don't be shy. This is a real opportunity. Oh, I love it. The phones have gone up. Yeah, submit your questions and we will get to them for the last 15 minutes of the session today. So, to our special guest. In 2022, Meganne was one of only 17 people selected from 22,500 applicants to join the European Space Agency's trainee astronaut program. Her day job is just as impressive. She's the Exploration Commercialisation Lead of the UK Space Agency. But how did that journey begin? That's what you're going to get some insight into today. Born in 1987 in England, Meganne grew up in Wollongong, now lives in the UK, via Bologna, Italy. Meganne holds British, Italian, Australian and New Zealand citizenship. She's fluent in Italian, English, French, and some Japanese. Armed with numerous academic qualifications, including a first-class honours degree, a PhD in engineering and industrial chemistry, Meganne has received several national awards for outstanding research in her field. And for fun, she loves whitewater rafting, climbing. She holds a black belt in Hapkido. And when she does have any spare time, she likes to knit. Keep your peepers peeled for a little knitted friend who may appear on stage at some point this morning. I feel like we need some kind of a space countdown really to bring out, kind of a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gents, please welcome to the stage Dr Meganne Christian. fella. We'll get to her in a moment. I did mention Liam and Matilda first up, Meganne. Do you want to just tell everyone who they are?
Yeah, Liam is my husband. He's Australian as well. We met at UNSW, and Matilda is our elderly dog.
And are they with us?
Unfortunately, they couldn't be. I mean, the quarantine rules to get into Australia for animals, I think you know all about them, so we couldn't bring Matilda over. And so Liam's at home looking after Matilda. So home is in Oxfordshire in the UK.
Is he watching?
He's watching.
Hi, Liam. Hi. All right, we're going to run through in somewhat of a chronological order today, and we will, of course, get to the European Space Agency via the Vomit Comet. Everyone needs to know about that. But let's go back to you at school. In terms of the subjects that you studied, did you know early on that you wanted a career in space?
Definitely not. I changed my mind pretty much every single day about what I wanted to do. Everything from artist, architect, actor, a lot of A's. But it kind of went through a whole lot of different things. I did know that I really liked maths. Maths was my favorite subject. At the same time, I really loved languages. So when it came to choosing my subjects at the HSC, I did maths and chemistry and languages as well. So you can see from that selection that I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I do remember when I was about in year 5, when in the curriculum you start to learn about planets and black holes and things like that, that I was absolutely fascinated by space. It's just that Australia didn't have a space agency at the time, so it wasn't in the forefront of my mind.
So I really want to ask you what sort of an actor you were thinking you might be, like just so we know the alternate path.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll get to it. I did do a bit of sort of amateur acting while I was at uni, in uni reviews, but I'm not very good.
Sure. All right, so what did you actually end up studying? Which pathway did you go down?
So I went to UNSW and I studied a Bachelor of Engineering in Industrial Chemistry. And to be honest, engineering wasn't exactly on my radar. I definitely thought, yes, I want to do sciences, but it was really only because of this particular scholarship program, the Co-op Scholarship Program, that I saw that there was this really interesting degree which was a cross between science and engineering, and I thought that that could really fulfill my desire for problem solving at the same time as the scientific discovery. And with this scholarship, you get to do a bunch of industrial training placements as well, and so I thought that would be really a good experience, and that's what I decided to do.
And did you always think, yeah, I'll do postgrad studies, I'll do a PhD as well?
No, again, even when I was at uni, I was sort of going, well, what do I want to do after this? But as I said, I did some industrial training placements. So I worked at a wastewater treatment plant in Wollongong for 10 weeks. I worked at a membrane filtration plant. We're making polymer membranes for water filtration, and I spent a year at BlueScope Steel in Port Kembla. And I did really enjoy those industrial training placements, and it gave me an idea of the kind of role that I could potentially go into when I finished uni. But basically, my undergraduate thesis supervisor came to me with chocolate and the offer of doing overseas travel and said, hey, you should do a PhD with me. And apparently that was enough. So I was bribed by chocolate and overseas travel to do a PhD. But no, I think there's probably a lot more behind that. I really enjoyed the kind of research and discovery, as I said. So it wasn't just the chocolate, but that helped.
Yeah, that's some persuasive chocolate. What kind of chocolate was it?
It was probably French chocolate because he's French.
Okay. And you have indeed travelled all over the world. This really ends up adding up to a lot of time spent at university, which can be a great thing. But how else did you spend your non-study time?
Yeah, I definitely went all out with the extracurriculars when I was at uni. I think, so I was young when I started uni. Really not young by Queensland standards. I had just turned 17 when I started uni. So this was my first real experience out in the world. I moved away from home and got kicked out of the uni pub many, many times because I wasn't old enough to be there. But I really wanted to be involved in university life. So I did university reviews. You can see me doing the tech crew there, learnt lighting design and stage managing, and also I spent a lot of time on stage during these reviews as well. Actually, the stage managing was one of the scariest things I've ever done. There was so much pressure on me because it was a sketch comedy show, and so there were lots of cues, and I was having to manage all this. So it was scary, but I really enjoyed that too, and I think that probably led into wanting to do something with a lot of pressure. And I also ran a volunteer program called Yellow Shirts. So a lot of you will know that at the beginning of the university year, you have orientation week. And at UNSW, it's a really huge event, and we have a big group of volunteers called Yellow Shirts. And I did that right from when I started university. Here's a story. So in my first year, when I turned up on campus and got a tour from a yellow shirt, that yellow shirt was Liam. So we didn't actually get together for another 5 years until I started my PhD, but we knew each other. But yeah, so I did this volunteer program. I did just a normal yellow shirt, giving tours, running activities, that kind of thing. Then I became a squad leader to look after a small team of these volunteers. Then an organizing team member, ran the social programs, which is why you see a picture of me on a giant jumping castle there. And then I was the coordinator for the program. And my PhD supervisor wasn't particularly happy with me doing that because it meant I took a semester off my PhD. But these things happen.
I love that's where your love story started. I feel compelled to say I also met my husband at QUT.
Oh, really?
There's something in the water.
Yeah.
But I'm not a reserve astronaut. This seems like a kind of an obvious question to ask, given the role that all of your studies have played. But in terms of how you see the importance of universities, like where we are today, how important do you see them in terms of education and broader society?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's absolutely formative. And that's not just in terms of education, but it's in terms of becoming an adult, right? The years that you have at university are the years where you become who you will be for the rest of your life. Not necessarily what pathway you will take, but, the kind of person that you will be. At least that was the case for me. So yeah, those years are absolutely fundamental.
In 2014, just 10 years ago, although it feels shorter than that, you finished your PhD, Meganne. You donned the floppy hat and robes. Mm-hmm. Congratulations, a huge achievement. What had you planned to do next? Do you think about a gap year on the beach? You don't strike me as someone who likes to just lay back and do nothing. You prefer to be busy. So what was the plan?
Yeah, again, I still hadn't decided what I wanted to do with my life. I obviously was in this, I was doing academic research, and again, I was enjoying it. So I started looking for postdocs or industry opportunities. I was in Canberra at the time because my husband was working at the National Library. We just got married in January of that year. And so I was spending my time just doing job applications, basically. After a few months, well, actually, going back a little bit, somebody contacted me, an academic in France contacted me saying that they had a postdoc position available to go and work there to kind of continue the research that I had been doing during my PhD. Unfortunately, that fell through. He didn't get the funding to do it, so I was at a loose end again, looking for a potential postdoc. And I did want to get some experience in Europe. Well, internationally, but Europe in particular, because I had a UK passport, and that was Europe at the time. So it was easy enough to move there. And then through a professor that I had met at a conference in Serbia the year before, she sent me this advertisement for a job in Bologna. And yeah, then so I applied, and it was on a topic that I didn't really know much about this material called graphene. We got some times mixed up with the interviews that I had to do, so I ended up doing an interview from car park, at McDonald's car park between Canberra and Sydney. But yeah, somehow I actually managed to impress them from the car park and got the job. And so kind of blindly moved to Bologna in Italy a few months later.
Incredible. Could you speak Italian at that stage?
No, not at all. No, but I had studied French, so that helped a lot. So I got on Duolingo and learnt pretty quickly.
It's amazing. You could have ended up in France, could have had some more of those French chocolates.
Yes, yeah.
So Bologna, the plan was only...
so it was supposed to be a 1 to 2 year postdoc.
How long did you stay?
9 years. So I eventually got a permanent position at the National Research Council of Italy. You can see me, this is in the lab, which was a clean room. So every day I spent in these suits because we were working with, well, as I said, graphene, but that clean room is mainly for semiconductor materials, so you have to have really, really high purity air to be able to work with them. And so that's why I was wearing these particular clothes. And so I was spending my days in the lab working on a material called graphene.
You start to look a little more space-like there.
Yeah, I guess
I'm just
so.
wondering if we should talk about the vomit comet now, because that was in Bologna, wasn't it?
It
or should we
was.
save it till later? What do you think?
Well, we can talk about it now because it actually had nothing to do with my future career in space, except perhaps a little push towards it. So while I was working on this material called graphene, which is mainly known for the fact that it's extremely light and it's extremely highly conductive, both in terms of thermal conduction and electrical conduction, has a lot of amazing properties, won the Nobel Prize in 2010. But it actually has a whole range of applications, and one of those that I was working on was for thermal management in satellites. So there are these devices called loop heat pipes, which are basically heat exchangers, and they have to have some way to bring the liquid around. And so there's this porous material inside which sucks the liquid through. Now, to improve this porous material, you can add graphene, long story short. But these have to work in satellites, so they have to work when there's no gravity. So I have to test that does work. And to do that, you go on what's called a parabolic flight, also called the vomit comet. The reason for that is the parabolic flight works like this. So it does a parabola shape like this. So it goes up very, very steeply. Then they sort of turn off the engines, and for the top part of the parabola, you're in zero gravity, or you're weightless. And then engines come back on, and it does the bottom part of the parabola. And so you have, at the top of that, about 22 seconds of weightlessness. At the bottom of the parabola, you have double gravity. And so you're constantly changing between this double gravity and zero gravity. And that's not very comfortable. I did a couple of these flights, and the first one was fantastic. I had a lot of fun, and I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. But the second one I did, really, it has its name for a reason. I got extremely sick, and I was worried about that because it was just before I applied to become an astronaut. And so I thought, oh, is this going to affect my application? Is this going to be a problem? But I spoke to the doctor on board, and he said, actually, no, it's a different mechanism from how astronauts get sick. So actually, a lot of astronauts get sick on a parabolic flight. So, phew. But yeah, it's an amazing feeling, really. I remember at one point, there were 3 of us doing the experiment, so that meant that 2 could be working on the experiment at any one time, and another person could just go and have fun, which could mean sitting in the back of the plane looking out the window, but it could mean going to what they call the free floating zone. And the person who's in charge of all the scientists that are on the plane said, okay, come here, sit down, close your eyes. And so I did. Then we got to the top of the parabola, the weightless part, and he spun me around in the air, and then he set me down and he said, where are you? I'm like, well, you've put me on the ground. He said, open your eyes. No, I was on the ceiling. You just lose any sort of sense of direction. Of course, I had to reorient myself pretty quickly because it was coming to double gravity in a second.
Still, an incredible sort of portent for what was to come in your career. So Meganne, you've taken us from Australia to well, almost France, Italy, we need to have a little detour to Antarctica,
Yeah.
obviously. Because I guess if this was some kind of a space fairy tale, you know, some kind of space scout would have spotted you and your abilities in microgravity and invited you to join. But of course, it doesn't always work that way. The curveball is a trip to Antarctica. How did that come about?
Yeah. Well, the National Research Council, where I was working, has some permanent observatories, mainly around climate change, also around things like geomagnetism, earth sciences, glaciology, in Antarctica. They have 2 stations. There's Mario Zucchelli Station, which is on the coast of Antarctica, and there's Concordia Station, which is shared with the French Polar Institute, and that's right in the middle of the Eastern Antarctic Plateau, about 1,200 kilometers from the coast, about 600 kilometers from the nearest station, so the nearest human. But yeah, so they send around a request for expressions of interest for people to go and spend a year looking after these observatories at Concordia Station. And the first time this request for expressions of interest came around, I thought back to when I was about 12 years old and went to the International Antarctic Centre in Christchurch in New Zealand, and thought, oh, I remember how much I loved that and how much I was fascinated by Antarctica, and how, at the time I thought, oh, maybe one day I'll make a lot of money and I'll get to go on a cruise to Antarctica or something like that. But yeah, so I thought back to that young girl and how much I would love to go there. But then I thought, but these are looking after atmospheric physics and meteorology observatories. This is not my background. I do applied sciences. These are natural sciences. So I actually just let it go. I just ignored it. But then this announcement came around again a year later, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to reply and say, you know, would you accept an application from someone like me? And they said, yeah, come and have a chat. Turned out that chat was an interview, and they selected me to go and spend a year in Antarctica.
That interview wasn't in a car park between McDonald's and
It was not. I was actually just next door to their building, so that was an easy one to get to.
And so what officially the role was atmospheric physicist
Yes.
and meteorologist at Concordia Station in winter of 2019.
Yeah, well, I arrived in November 2018 and left in November 2019.
Right.
So I was part of the winter over crew, and the winter over crew has to arrive at the beginning of the previous summer because we have to learn everything we need to know for the subsequent winter during that time. And then, of course, when we get to the other end of that, we have to be able to teach the next winter over crew what they need to know for the following year. So it means that you're there for an entire year.
I love that we're talking about winter and summer in Antarctica. What's the temperature difference?
So the average temperature in summer at Concordia is about minus 30 degrees. The average temperature in winter is about minus 70. And we got down to a wind chill of minus 104 degrees.
How'd you cope with that?
It was cold.
Just in terms of backtracking for a sec before you actually got there and felt the cold, what was your preparation in terms of, you know, time spent in Antarctica? It's an extremely different existence.
Yeah, that's right. And so you do have to go through some sort of quite rigorous training. And in our case, the training also was kind of a selections. So everybody who goes to Antarctica for the first time, to the Italian stations, either Mario Zucchelli on the coast or Concordia Station, has to do this 2-week-long course. And in the mornings, you do theory about what it's like living in Antarctica and things like how to approach or not approach animals and that kind of thing. In the afternoon, we would do some more practical training. So as I said, Mario Zucchelli is on the coast, so a lot of people go out in boats. And so we had to learn to wear these dry suits to go out in the boats and then fall out of the boats and be rescued from the boats and this kind of thing. The dry suits that they use for training are not dry. But thankfully, the water was warm there, so it was okay. But the most important sort of training we did that week was first aid, because we had to, we had a whole year there by ourselves, couldn't get out, couldn't there was no way of being rescued, but we had a doctor and a small hospital. And firefighting, which you can see here. That's because Concordia Station is on over 3 kilometres of ice, which means that you can't ground any of your electrical equipment. So you get this big build-up of static electricity, which could cause a spark, and so you can quite easily cause a fire, especially since the air is extremely dry. Antarctica is a desert. The air is just too cold to be able to hold much moisture, and so you need to have some good firefighting training. And then we spent a week on a glacier in Mont Blanc to try and, well, partly team building, also partly just to kind of get used to the conditions, but -10 is pretty different to -100. So, and as I said, for the winter over crew, they sort of had 2 of each role during those 2 weeks, and they selected one from each to then go and do the year.
Okay. And it's a reasonably small crew. About how many people were you living with?
There were 13 of us for the winter. So the summer you get up to sort of 80 or 90 people, but during the winter there were only 13 of us. And so those 13, that's our crew there. We then spent another week together up in the Alps for team building, and also we did a lot of psychological preparation. So we talked to each other about what we might encounter, things like what we might be annoyed about from other people, but also what might annoy other people about us. So just to be prepared for any sort of situation as it came. But it's impossible to properly prepare for that situation because it's crazily difficult psychologically and physically, but mainly psychologically.
Yeah, but it's amazing now in terms of where your career has gone. You can see how this would be tremendous preparation potentially for a space mission one day. What did you say might annoy other people about you?
I honestly can't remember.
Your bad memory, maybe.
Yeah.
All right, so just take us, because most of us haven't been to Antarctica. What does the sky look like in Antarctica?
Well, there are a few months where it's always sunny and a few months where the sun never comes above the horizon. And then those months in between are the most beautiful because you get these amazing sunrises and sunsets, which you can see in some of these photos here, where the sky is, multicolored. Mostly, Concordia Station has very good weather. It's cold, but it's good weather. So the sky is usually clear. And that means that when you get to the winter, when you get to the 100 days of complete darkness, you have an amazing atmosphere, an amazing ability to see the stars. And there was one particular thing that I did, I think you'll see a video of it a little bit later, which was every week I would go and climb a tower to clean the instruments that were on this tower. And it was about 1 kilometre away from the base. Now, usually it's a bit, you don't want to go out and just spend 10 minutes trying to let your eyes adjust to the darkness because it's too cold. But when you have to go and walk for 1 kilometre, then that's a good time to do it. So I would take my headlamp off along with my colleague, and we would just let our eyes adjust, and it felt like you were inside the stars. The atmosphere is very, very thin, and so it's really spectacular. And then the number of shooting stars, and then if it's a moonless day, you can look down and you can see your shadow in the light of the Milky Way. That's how bright the stars are. It's an incredible experience.
That sounds magical and miraculous all at the same time, inside the stars. Wow.
Yeah. Although I have to admit that the time that I've seen the best stars was in the Northern Territory.
Really?
So yes, I don't admit that to many people, but yeah, it's true. Well, I did a safari up in Kakadu, Catherine and Litchfield, and we slept one night on an abandoned runway, just put our sleeping bags out on the abandoned runway and could just watch the stars from there, and it was similar. I mean, you could see them in the same sort of way, but didn't have the problem of the cold.
Well, let's see what happens after you go to space, whether the view from space trumps the Northern Territory or Antarctica. So when you were at Concordia in Antarctica, what kind of experiments were you running?
So I was in charge of the atmospheric physics and meteorology observatories, which were mainly centered around climate change, broadly speaking. So I was looking after some radiometers that were measuring the radiation that was arriving from the sun and that was reflected back. So this gives us a kind of baseline idea of the energy balances of the planet, also helps us to calibrate satellites. I was working with a LiDAR, which was studying the polar stratospheric clouds. Polar stratospheric clouds are very special kind of clouds, very, very high up in the atmosphere that only occur during the polar winter. And you can see what kind of chemical reactions go on these clouds to understand the degradation of ozone, so the ozone layer. I was also doing meteorology, which means weather predictions, but also going into global weather and climate models, and that meant launching the weather balloon every night. Weather balloons are launched all around the world at the same time of day. So this was 7 p.m. for us, but it's 12 UTC. And so, yeah, to get an idea of the world's weather.
That weather balloon is about the size of a car that you're holding, and you're sort of being blown around a bit there. Obviously, you're pretty strong. That's where your black belt and Aikido comes in.
Well, I mean, fortunately, the balloon was filled with helium, so it holds itself up. But yes, definitely when there was a bit of wind, really got tossed around, as you saw in the video. But fortunately, that didn't happen too often. As I said, the weather is usually good at Concordia, so usually it was quite an easy thing to do.
Antarctica really looks a little bit like another planet. Sort of quite desolate and extreme. Is it seen as good preparation for a career in space?
Well, yes, actually. So Concordia Station is also known, here's that tower I was talking about, by the way, that I had to go up and clean the instruments once a week on. So Concordia is also known as White Mars. It's the closest thing we have on Earth to what a mission to Mars would be, and that's because of the isolation, the 9 months of isolation. It's because of the high altitude, so it's an altitude of 3,200 meters, which is because of how thin the air is at the poles. That's more like being at 4,000 meters at our latitudes. So that means that you have a problem of hypoxia, so low oxygen levels, which is an interesting thing to study for space travel, because if you can reduce the amount of oxygen that you have to take with you, then that reduces the mass that you have to take with you, or the oxygen that you have to generate in one way or another. So trying to find the right level of oxygen. And also the psychological elements, the physical elements, the dynamics between the crew. So we would, every month, for this reason, the European Space Agency sends down a research doctor to do tests on the Winter Rover crew. So every month they would take blood samples, urine samples, everything, to test our physical conditions. We would answer a lot of questionnaires, psychological questionnaires, also about food. There was a study on probiotics, so what might be interesting for future missions. There were also cognitive studies, and one of these was quite fun. During the summer season at the beginning, they taught us to dock the Soyuz, which is a Russian capsule, onto the International Space Station using a simulator that they had down there at Concordia. And they gave us increasingly difficult exams on docking procedures. And then they left it for 1 month or 3 months, depending on which group you're in, and you had to repeat these exams during the year. See how you went over time, see what you forgot. And the idea of this is, well, if you're going to Mars, then you're going to learn to land on Mars when you're on Earth. So what kind of training procedure might need to be implemented for those 9 months that you're taking to get there?
What did you eat, by the way? What's the food like in Antarctica?
There's a Lonely Planet guide that talks about the best restaurants on every continent, and the one in Antarctica was at Concordia Station, because we have either a French or an Italian chef in my case. So the food is actually really good. Problem is, you only get fresh food for the 3 months of summer, and then you kind of have to depend on frozen food and canned food for the rest of the year. But the chef is extremely creative and manages to come up with some good stuff.
So you're in Antarctica eating Italian?
Yes. But not just Italian. I mean, sometimes he would prepare strange things like crocodile, or, I mean, we get supplies from Australia and New Zealand. That's the closest place to get to the Italian research base. And so they, for some reason, decided to order crocodile and kangaroo, and yeah.
What?
I know, it's bizarre. The first time I ever tasted crocodile was in Antarctica.
Wow. And what did you think?
I didn't like it very much. I mean, it does kind of taste like chicken, but like an even more boring version of chicken.
I reckon it's like fishy chicken.
Yeah.
I ate it once as well.
Yeah.
But, wow. Last question on Antarctica before we leave. What does it smell like?
So the base does have a smell, because we recycle about 70% of the water. The grey water, that is. And so the filters, they use a particular resin, and that gets a bit stinky, especially during the summer period when you have lots of people using it. But really, if you go outside, you can't really smell anything much. It's really just ice, which means that when you come back, I remember when I flew back from Antarctica the first time, I went back again just for a summer season, but when I flew back the first time, they opened the cargo door of the plane, this military plane, and suddenly I got this waft of the smell of freshly cut grass and the smell of the sea. This was in Christchurch, and yeah, so absolutely overwhelming, because when you're there, you don't really smell very much.
Yes. I lied. I got another question. Did you ever have any animal encounters in Antarctica?
No, so at Concordia, it's so far from the coast that, and so high up that it's too hostile for animals. But on the way back, I did get to visit with some penguins and lots of birds and seals as well.
Incredible. Not long after you returned from Antarctica, your mind turned to space. And in 2021, the European Space Agency had decided to recruit a class of astronauts. How often does that kind of thing happen?
Yeah, unfortunately, not very often at all. So this was the first time in 13 years that the European Space Agency had recruited astronauts. NASA does it fairly frequently. They do it every sort of 2 or 3 years, and they recruit a large class. I think they've had even up to 30 people in a class. But yeah, the European Space Agency hadn't done it since 2008, 2009. But when I was in Antarctica, the astronomer who was in our crew, he had applied for the previous round, and so he was kind of a little bit in the know, and he had heard rumors that they were going to recruit again. So it was while I was there that I learnt more about it, and I decided that I wanted to apply. Also because before I went to Antarctica, there were a whole lot of technical skills that I had thought that I wouldn't have. So various things around electronics and programming that I just didn't have much experience with, and so I wasn't very confident with. But I learnt them quickly during the summer period. I had to, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I also really enjoyed being the custodian of other people's experiments, other people's research. So these are experiments that people have put their life's work into, but they can't be there during the winter to look after them. And so I made the connection between that and what astronauts do on the International Space Station, which is the same thing. They're the custodians of research, of people who have put their life's work into this research on the ground, but they can't be there in space to do it. And so I made that connection, and it seemed like the next logical step.
So you and 23,000 other people applied. What were the actual tests or criteria? Was it physical or theoretical? What else did you have to do to end up being selected?
It was a 6-phase process, took about 18 months. It started like any other job application, sending in your CV and a motivation letter. The only difference was that you also had to answer a questionnaire, and you had to upload a medical certificate, the kind of medical certificate that you need if you want a private pilot's license. So kind of a minimum level of health that you have to prove to apply. And then that was, as you said, about 23,000 people. And so the European Space Agency had to screen through all those. And they got down to about 1,400 that they then took to round 2, which were the computer-based testing. And we did that in Hamburg at DLR in Germany. And they're the tests that pilots have to do to enter into a commercial airline, for example. There are things like maths and physics and logic. There were some really tough memory ones. There was one in particular where they would read out a series of numbers, so numbers between 1 and 9. They'd just keep reading them out. You didn't know how many they would read out. Then at a certain point, they would stop, and you would have to type that string of numbers out backwards, remembering as many of them as you could. And if you got, say, the third one wrong, but the rest of them right, you still only got 2 points for the first 2 that you got right. So that was a really, really tough one. I think the average is about sort of 5 or 6 that you tend to get. Fortunately, they did, I was in this kind of community that knew something about the selection process last time, and it was fairly similar. So people had found practice tests that you could do. So all in the lead up to this, I was doing some practice tests. But yeah, so that was phase 2. They also got us doing a bit of hand-eye coordination, working with a joystick. Then from there, they took about 400 people through the psychological round, which was a day of, in a small group, about 6 to 8 people in Cologne in Germany at the European Astronaut Center. And they put us through a number of different things, including group work, teamwork exercises, see how we work in a team, whether we can be leader or follower or both. A pair exercise, testing our communication. Also, interviews in one-on-one with a psychologist. They'd ask us everything back to when we were children. And also a panel interview with several psychologists. And so that was sort of a whole day, and we had some other questionnaires to answer as well. Then from there, about 100 people got through to the medical testing round, which was a whole week of medical tests. They did all sorts of things, really everything. You think of it, that they did it. Including fitness, but also mainly there were a lot of eye tests. They're really interested in knowing the health of your eyes, not so much whether you have perfect vision, as long as it's correctable. They're okay with that, but it's more about the health of your eyes, because your eyes do tend to get a lot worse when you're in microgravity for long periods of time. After the medical testing round, there was then a panel interview. About 50 people got through to that, and it was a tough panel interview. It was, we all have panel interviews. That's part of our jobs usually. So you would think it's something that I would be prepared for, but actually it was a tough panel interview, because every time that they saw that you were in your comfort zone, they would take you right out of it and ask about something completely different. And then finally, the last step was about 25 of us got through to an interview with the Director General of the European Space Agency. And that was actually probably the easiest round, because he just wanted to chat to get to know us.
Take us to the exact moment where you found out that you had been successful in terms of potentially becoming Australia's first female astronaut.
Well, I was riding home from work. It was November, I think, or end of October, 2022. So I was on my bike on the cycle path. It was dark. And I got a phone call, so I felt my watch vibrating. And I thought, okay, and I'm not going to answer that. I'm riding my bike, I'm not going to answer. But then I looked down quickly and saw that it was a French number. And I knew that the headquarters of the European Space Agency is in France. So I thought, okay, I'm going to stop. So I pulled my bike to the side of the road, answered the phone, and it was the Director General. And he said, come to Paris, we're having the announcement of the 2022 class of astronauts. And so it was in that moment that I found out. I didn't know yet whether I would be a career astronaut or a reserve astronaut, but yeah, I knew that I was in the class. And then, a couple of weeks later, we all convened in Paris, actually in a hotel about an hour and a half outside of Paris, so there could be no leaks of who was in this class. They gave us a little bit of media training, they gave us our uniforms, we did interviews and photographs and things like that. And then there was the press conference, which you see here, where we were all revealed to the world.
Oh, come on, ladies and gents. Okay, so when you hung up the phone call on your watch on your bike,
Yeah.
What did you do in that moment?
I called Liam. Yeah, I was kind of just, well, I was expecting to hear, and I was, at this point, extremely hopeful, because it had been such a long process, and at every point I didn't think I would get to the next stage.
And what was your feeling? What was the overriding feeling at that point in time?
There was certainly excitement, but there was also relief that I hadn't gotten to this final step and not made it just at the final hurdle.
So in terms of that intake of astronauts, what kind of people, what careers were represented in the final cohort?
So there were 17 of us that were selected, divided into career astronauts and reserve astronauts. So the European Space Agency has a different approach to NASA. NASA trains everybody who they select from their large class, but not all of them get to fly. Whereas the European Space Agency would like to keep up its reputation, let's say, of everybody that they train then has a flight. Everybody that they train for ESA then has a flight. And so they have 5 flights available at the moment, so they have taken 5 career astronauts who have nearly finished their training now. The rest of us make up the reserve, and that means that we're waiting for our opportunity, waiting for our chance to fly. There are no guarantees. But the first person from our class to fly was actually the Swedish reserve, and he was on the ISS a few weeks ago. And the second person from our class to fly will be the Polish reserve, who will be on the ISS in a few months. So yeah, but lots of opportunities. And in terms of careers, we're a mix of scientists, engineers, doctors, and pilots with a military or civil background.
Wow. And there's also one person who has a disability?
That's right. We have the world's first, what they're calling para-astronaut. So he has above knee leg amputation, and he's doing a feasibility study, also British by the way. He's doing a feasibility study to see what needs to be changed in terms of training, in terms of equipment for people, in his case with that specific disability, but the idea is to open it up to people from any kind of disability somehow in the future. But this is that first step to see what's required for having para-astronauts.
So in terms of the upcoming missions for the European Space Agency, you'll be on one of those. Where are they going? What are they doing?
Well, we have, mainly at the moment, we have missions to the International Space Station. So a standard increment, they call it, is a 6-month mission, and the 5 flights for the career astronauts will be 6-month missions. There are also short duration missions with commercial providers. So for example, Marcus's flight a few weeks ago was with Axiom Space, which is a commercial provider, and he did 2 or 3 weeks on the International Space Station. The interesting difference there is you actually get just as much, or if not more, science done during that time than what you do in a 6-month mission. Because in a 6-month mission, the European Space Agency has only a 7.8% share in the International Space Station. So that means that the European Space Agency astronauts can spend 7.8% of their time on European experiments. The rest of the time they have to be helping out with NASA and other partners. They have to be working on maintenance of the station. Whereas for a short duration mission, the astronauts are spending 100% of their time on the European science. So it's interesting. So that's the main one at the moment, going to the International Space Station. Of course, we have the Artemis missions going back to the moon. This time, not just to go there, but to stay. So we're planning to have a European astronaut on Artemis 4. And then keeping on going from there. And the idea is that in the 2040s, there will be humans on Mars.
Do you have a preference? Mars, the moon, the ISS?
Oh, I'd like to do all of them, but that's probably not on the radar. No, I would definitely love to go to the ISS, but I think just kind of dreaming, just thinking about seeing the Earth from the moon as we see the moon from the Earth, that is an incredible thought. So I would absolutely love to go to the moon.
Folks, we're going to get to some of your questions in a moment, so don't forget you can send in some questions using the QR code. I can see some great questions already, some about the vomit comments, so we're going to have to return to that. But do get your questions in, whether you're in the audience today here at QUT or at home online. Liam, you can submit a question as well. Meganne, in terms of your extraordinary career path, it hasn't been a sort of a straight from A to B or from Earth to Moon, I guess. You've followed a lot of your interests and your passions. You've also got time to relax and do lots of other things as well. What do you do in your downtime?
Well, until last year, when I was living in Italy, we actually, for the last couple of years in Italy, we had a camper van, and on weekends we would go traveling everywhere around Europe in our camper van, and a lot of those times we would go up to the Dolomites, and we would do what's called Via Ferrata, which is kind of climbing, a protected rock climbing route, which is, yes, just like this. You'd climb up the Dolomite cliffs, and it's spectacular. There are varying degrees of difficulty. We would take Matilda, our dog, with us as well. She had a special backpack for dogs. So once we got that backpack, we were constantly going on Via Ferratas or cycling with her and that kind of thing. So that's something we absolutely love to do in Italy. And unfortunately, there aren't so many of those in the UK. So I'm going back to more banal things, I guess. I'm doing taekwondo and that kind of thing. But I guess of an evening during the week, like anybody else, I'll watch a show or a movie, and I'll knit or crochet or sew something. Yeah.
Aha. And so we get to our special guest today. Who is this?
This is Pengaroo. You might have seen her on some of the photos from the Vomit Comet. So I made Pengaroo, I knitted Pengaroo for Liam back in 2010 when we first got together, because he has this idea that penguins deserve to be mammals. And so I made him a sort of marsupial mammalian penguin. So there's Pengaroo and there's Pengarino. And Pengaroo travels around the world with us. She was in Antarctica with me, and she's been on all our travels. And then I knitted a giant world map blanket as well, and got some wooden penguin buttons. And so the penguin buttons go where Pengaroo has been in the world. But she will hopefully be my zero gravity indicator when I eventually get to space.
What, you'll take her to space?
Of course.
I thought there'd be rules, like, the carry-on rules just for flying around Australia, strict.
Yeah, I will have to get her approved. But it is a thing to have a zero gravity indicator. So when you're going up, when you're launching, you're obviously strapped in, but there has to be something that tells the ground when you're actually in zero gravity. And so what they do is they hang up an animal, usually a soft toy, and the animal starts flying around, which Pengaroo has done on the Vomit Comet, so she's had practice. So hopefully she will be my zero gravity indicator in space.
Prepared, a veteran zero gravity Pengaroo already. You also, since your selection in the ESA Astronaut program, you've taken on a new role in the UK with their space agency, Exploration and Commercialisation Lead. What does that mean? Yeah,
that's right. So I learnt so much during the selections process, really, about the space sector and about. Yes, I had that fascination from when I was young, but I didn't really know much about it. So I really learned a lot during the selections process, and I got more and more fascinated by it, and so I wanted to go into more into the space sector. And so I got a job at the UK Space Agency, which was, I guess, mutually beneficial because part of my job is as reserve astronaut, so I get to do a whole lot of outreach activities, which is part of my role with the European Space Agency, but if I didn't have it as part of my normal job, then I would just be doing it on my own time. So it's really great that with the UK Space Agency, I get to do it as part of my job, which means I can do a lot more. But no, the main part of my role is Exploration Commercialisation Lead. So I'm in the exploration team. And I mentioned the International Space Station. It's been around. It was the first parts of it were launched in 1998. It's had a permanent human presence since the year 2000. It was only originally supposed to be going for 15 years. It has outlived that, obviously, but at some point it will have to stop being used. So the date for that set at the moment is 2030. And led by NASA, they've decided that they don't want to have a station that's run by agencies this time. There will still be the Chinese space station. There may well be an Indian one by then as well. But they want these to be commercially led. So there are a number of companies that are working on building new space stations. And so my role at the UK Space Agency is to work with these future space stations, see how we can continue to do the kind of research, but also future manufacturing that we do now on the International Space Station, but with these commercial providers.
If you got a call tomorrow, and I don't know how quickly these things can happen, but if you got a call tomorrow, would it be like, right, pack your bags, get Pingaroo, we're off?
Well, what happened for Marcus was he got a call one day and they said, next week you have to be in Houston for training. And he had about 10 months before his flight. Usually for a short duration mission, it would be at least a year. So you would be straight off into training, yes.
And you'd say yes to that call?
Oh, of course. And actually the UK Space Agency has just late last year signed a memorandum of understanding with Axiom Space, this commercial provider, to do an all-British mission. Well, to investigate the possibility of doing an all-British mission, because the idea of this mission would be fully commercially sponsored. And so if the sponsorship comes through, then that's a very interesting proposition.
Yeah, and given that space missions, there are more and more countries getting involved, some might argue the cost of space travel is lowering, although it's not exactly economy fares just yet. No. But where's the big push mostly? Is it to go back to the moon? Is it more focused on Mars? Is it about removing space junk?
There are a lot. So, I mean, the most tangible use of space for us every day are satellites. So we would absolutely grind to a halt if we didn't have those assets, if we didn't have the kind of communications satellites, also the GPS satellites, that kind of thing. Everything would absolutely grind to a halt. There are also satellites that are doing Earth observations to monitor climate change. Over half of the things that we need to monitor for climate change can only be monitored from space. So these are the kind of most tangible uses of space for us on Earth. But there's also the exploration side of things. And we want to go further out into the solar system. We want to go to the moon and we want to go to Mars. And so the idea of leaving this low Earth orbit exploration to companies is that we free up resources to do that. But it's also quite fascinating what you can do in low Earth orbit. So when you don't have gravity, there are a whole lot of things that can be manufactured of benefit for us here on Earth. So for example, pharmaceuticals. The way that you can crystallize proteins, for example, when you don't have gravity, means that you can get them a lot purer, you can get them more homogeneous. And one big example of this is a study that was done by Merck. They managed to crystallize a pharmaceutical that can't be crystallized on Earth, which means, and it's for cancer treatment, which means that it could be given by injection at home rather than going into hospital and spending 5 or 6 hours having an infusion. Other things coming up in the future are bioprinting of organs potentially. So there are 3D bioprinters on the International Space Station now. At the moment, just printing small tissues. The problem is if you try to print an organ on Earth, it will just collapse. Gravity is there, it'll just make the whole thing collapse. It's not strong enough to hold up. But if you take it into zero gravity, then you can make this whole organ structure, theoretically, that won't actually collapse in on itself, and so we can meet the demand for organs in the future. And then that's the medical side. Also semiconductors can be made a lot more purely. Also fiber optics, that's another big one. So there are a lot of amazing things that can only be done in microgravity. And so aside from these space stations where we're going to have humans on board, there will probably also be a number of space factories that are manufacturing pharmaceuticals and advanced materials coming up in the next few years.
Fascinating. All right, we're going to go to audience questions, and there are a lot of them, so let's see how many we can whip through, Meganne. We're going to start off with, I think we've got 2 students here at QUT who are going to ask questions directly. Hello. What's your name?
Hello, my name's Joshua. I'm a faculty science student here at QUT. I understand that you're the founder and CEO of a startup, Your Science Tech, with the goal of cultivating technologies for the benefit of humankind. How did it start, and what has the journey been like so far?
Yeah, I realize that's a very kind of broad motto for a company. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm no longer the CEO of that company because with my job at the UK Space Agency, I'm a civil servant, so can't have a kind of extra interest. But, so that started when I was working on graphene, actually, doing these parabolic flights. The PI in charge of that particular experiment was from ULB in Brussels, University in Brussels. And we tossed a whole lot of ideas around between us. He and some others had a patent for some cybersecurity things, so it's sort of, the company was built on this patent for cybersecurity, but then I had all these ideas from my time in Antarctica about how to improve the lives of people who are working there using materials science, so improving, for example, the glasses that as soon as you go outside just get absolutely fogged up and then iced up. So if I had to go on a walk for 3 kilometers, for example, I'd have to take several pairs of ski goggles with me because either I then had to take them off and just let my face burn with cold or not be able to see. So that's a simple thing that could be improved with material science. And so then we thought, okay, this is, working with extreme environments, materials. That extreme environments also include space, so we kind of started moving towards space, and we were doing this all just in spare time, really, and it's eventually ended up in wanting to give kind of space experiences to people on Earth. For example, astronaut-like training experiences and things like that. So they have, not we anymore, they have collaborations with the United Arab Emirates actually to start doing parabolic flights and astronaut experiences in the UAE.
Thanks, Joshua. Hello, what's your name?
My name is Lily. I'm also a student at the QUT studying science. I was wondering if you know, or what your opinion is on if space will ever become more accessible to the general populace.
Yeah, great question. I think it will. I think it's slower than we would hope. And I mean, 40, 50 years ago, science fiction writers, I think science fiction writers of the day would be disappointed with where we're at the moment. We haven't gone back to the moon yet, for example. So it's slow, but I think that it will open up. It's already starting to happen, for the moment, only for people who have an awful lot of money. But launch prices for cargo have gone down a lot. And so the hope is that launch prices for humans will also go down with increasing kind of commercial sector, these flights from companies and that kind of thing. So I think it will happen. I think it will happen slowly. At first, it will only be for people who have a lot of money or can get a sponsorship. But yeah, I'm quite positive that it will happen in the next 10 years or so. I am also a little bit concerned about how it all happens. It has to happen safely and sustainably. We really have to make sure that these companies are responsible when doing it.
Great questions, guys. Thank you. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left, and Meganne, would you like to do a fast and furious
All right, I'll try and answer quickly.
Via the screen in front, which I think Lara is operating from somewhere in space tonight. One of the first questions I saw pop up is, would you consider a multiple-year mission to Mars?
Oh, a multiple-year mission. Would I consider it? Yes. I don't know if I would answer. Actually, it was one of the questions I got during the selections process. Would you go to Mars? And my answer was yes, as long as the plan was to return. Because there have been kind of ideas of going to Mars and staying there, but Earth and I would want to come back. I realize that there's a risk and I would take that risk, but I would want the plan to be to come back.
What do you think of Elon Musk's idea of sending 1 million people to Mars by 2050?
Yeah, exactly. Fine. Again, I think it needs to be done sustainably. I would not be one of those 1 million people.
Okay. Do you think Australia will select their own astronauts?
I really hope so. So in my selections, there was an Australian who, along with me, who got right through the final round, wasn't selected in the end, but she works for the Australian Space Agency and has been sent to do training with the 5 career astronauts to see what that training looks like to potentially set up a human spaceflight program in Australia. So let's hope that happens. But I do think that before we send the first person to space under the Australian flag, there should be a selection that is open to all Australian citizens and not just those of us who are lucky, like me, to have that extra passport.
What is your view of extraterrestrial life?
I think it's out there. I don't know if we'll ever encounter it, but statistically, surely, I mean, there has to be something out there, right? The universe is so big.
Do you feel the current climate regarding different space agencies is one of cooperation or competition?
A bit of both. There is definitely competition there, particularly between China and the US. Obviously, the conflict in Russia has put a big dampener on things, especially cooperation between the European Space Agency and Roscosmos, the Russian space agency. So definitely competition there, but there's also a lot of cooperation. So the Artemis Accords have been signed by many, many different countries. There's accords for how we go to the moon and how we stay there. So I think there's hope, and I kind of hope that we can model it on something like the Antarctic Treaty, which is a demonstration of how well we can cooperate internationally for science.
What majors or minors would you recommend for young people hoping to go into the same industry as you?
Well, I think you can see from my story that really anything goes. So, I mean, at the moment, you have to have a science, engineering or medicine, or be a pilot. You have to have one of those backgrounds to become an astronaut. But that's really broad. And I think in the future that will expand further as well, because on the moon we'll need people to capture the situation as well. We'll need artists and journalists and every kind of technical area as well. So I think that's going to expand. So I think it doesn't matter. What matters is that you do something that you do love, because you have to be at the top of your game if you're going to be selected as an astronaut, and you'll only be at the top of your game if you're doing something that you really enjoy. At the same time, you have to be lucky to be selected, unfortunately, at least for now. And so it might not happen. And if you're doing something that you do love, then you're fulfilled anyway.
That's good news for the geologist who's gotten in touch today as well, just asking how to get involved, specifically with graduate programs. Any, particular path you'd recommend there?
I think geology is an excellent field, especially for the going to the moon and Mars and so on. If you're interested in space, then look into a postgraduate in planetary sciences, for example. That's a good way to kind of move into that.
I'm interested in space architecture, says someone. Where are we at the moment in designing buildings for astronaut missions, and what does the future of this look like? Is there a place for architectural design in astroengineering?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the European Space Agency recently commissioned a design from, I can't remember which architectural firm it was, but for a moon base. And so absolutely there is space for it. The future of this kind of thing is in using the resources that are available on location. So using moon regolith, moon dust, to build things, maybe 3D print, for example, or laser it so it melts. And these are all kinds of studies that are being done. But yeah, the idea is to, as much as possible, use the resources that are available. I'm not even sure I understand this question, but I'm going to put it to you because you've got a big brain. What happens to space-time when cosmic objects collide? Oh, I have to ask an astrophysicist. I don't know about that one.
Well, Margaret Shield talked before about late nights and early mornings in space.
Yeah.
What kind of, like, are there clocks?
On the
What's
ISS,
happening?
they're on UTC.
UTC?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it means that it's great for people in Europe, for the operators in Europe, but in Houston, it means that they have completely weirdly phased daytimes, the people who are on ground control.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, so they're up in the middle of the night, Houston time,
Yeah.
in order to talk to people on the ISS in space time,
Yes.
or UTC
Yeah.
time. Someone says, did you figure out why you didn't get sick the first time on the Vomit Comet, but you did on the second time?
I don't know for sure, but these things really depend on the condition of your body at the time. And the second time, I hadn't had a good sleep. I didn't eat properly that morning, so I was extremely tired. And I think they also gave me a lower dose of the seasickness medicine that they give to everybody before you board the flight. So I think it was a combination of factors.
Is there anything about space that scares you?
I mean, I think as humans we're all scared in a way by the vastness of space and just how small it makes us feel. But about going to space, I don't have any sort of concrete fears about it. I just have this sense of wonder.
There's a question here which is technically for your parents. You can answer it. Does Meganne ring Dad, who I know is in the audience today, for advice? If so, what kind of things does an astronaut ask their parents?
Do I ring you for advice? I definitely got a lot of advice from my dad growing up, kind of working, selecting subjects, for example. We worked together on pros and cons lists of which degree to choose and that kind of thing. In terms of astronaut advice, fortunately I haven't had to ask too much of that yet.
Prepare yourself, David. There could be a few more of those coming. She's riding a bike, gets a phone call from... Yeah. What about as a woman in science? Have you faced any specific barriers or pushback because of your gender?
No, I've been lucky. Because of the work of all the amazing women before me, I've been lucky that I've never felt that I couldn't do something because I'm a woman. I have 4 sisters. My mum passed away, but she was also an amazing presence in our lives, and so I think with my mum and my 4 sisters, I never felt like there was anything that would hold us back. Of course, there are moments. There are moments when people say, for example, during my PhD, women try to do too many things, can't just focus on one thing. Like, well, proved you wrong, didn't I? So yeah, there have been moments, but and I have certainly been in male-dominated fields. There weren't many women in my industrial chemistry degree. When I went to Antarctica, 3 of the 13 of us were women. When I went back the second time, 2 of the 30 of us for the summer season were women. So, and in Antarctica, it is a bit like going back in time in terms of kind of the atmosphere there. But yeah, no, generally I've been very lucky.
For you now, Meganne, as a reserve astronaut, does it feel a little bit like you're always,
Yeah, so
boiled, ready to go? I mean, and I mean that down to things like, do you have to stay particularly fit? Watch what, you eat or drink, or, those kinds of things?
Well, my obligation is to keep up my medical certification. I have an annual medical, so I'm obliged to keep that up. Also requested to do, champion space, basically. Other than that, there's no real requirement on us. But, it's a bit like, I said I felt relieved when I got the call. Relieved that the selection process was over. But now I'm still waiting. And so there is that kind of almost frustration and not knowing when something might come up. Although being at the UK Space Agency means that I get a better view on that.
Yeah. These are such great questions, and we're not going to get through them all, but I think people will have a chance to talk to you after. A couple of quick ones to finish. What are the ethical considerations for colonising Mars and the Moon?
That's a big question. And it's probably better that somebody else answers it. But things that I think about is, you know, in the past, when we've gone and taken resources from the planet, we haven't really thought much about it beforehand and what that might mean for the future. So these are the kind of things that we have to think about when we then plan to take resources from the moon or asteroids, for example.
You can't help but imagine, like, sitting here today. I think there's probably, well, I hope there's a part of all of us who just cannot wait to hear the moment that Dr. Meganne Christian has been sent into space, because we'll feel like there's, you know, a little bit of us on that journey with you. And because of the kind of technology and access we've had, particularly with people like Chris Hadfield and the kind of the profile that he gave with his time away, and the connection in terms of, you know, even singing songs and whatnot. Have you given any thought to what song you might sing when you're in space?
I actually have. I'm a big fan of Tim Minchin, the comedian, Australian comedian, and I would like to sing Not Perfect by Tim Minchin. You can look it up.
What's the gist of that sentiment?
Well, it starts, it talks about this is my earth and I live in it and it's fine, and it comes down to this is my brain and I live in it and it's fine. Just talking about the kind of difficulties that each of these things might have: the earth, country, house, body, brain, the little defects that these things might have, but it's okay. It's all good.
Can I take a selfie with you, with everyone in here, so that when you are in space, because we'll see some selfies from space, we'll do this a la, you know, kind of Ellen. Can you stand here? Can everyone just lean in so we can get the... I'll tell you when you're in at the sides. Okay, hang on, I've got to flip it round. Oh, you all look amazing. Okay, yeah, we ducked out. 1, 2, 3. You weren't smiling, Yvonne, but that's okay. Actually, Yvonne's knitting now that I see that there. Oh, you're halfway to making a pengaroo. Ladies and gents, I think we can agree it has been more than fascinating, thrilling, exciting to have you here today. Cannot wait to see what adventures lie ahead for you. Can you please thank Dr. Meganne Christian?
Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to make your way. Really should have got Pengaroo in the selfie, shouldn't I? Folks, thank you so much for joining us today for QUT Connections, the forum for bold ideas. Later today you will receive a feedback survey via email, as well as an invitation to join the QUT Connections database. Would love you to join that database. You can find out when the next event's taking place. If you join by the 31st of March, you will enter the draw for 2 tickets to the Queensland Ballet. For those of you who are in the room, we encourage you to stay and network in the foyer. There's refreshments there. Other guests, QUT experts, Lauren Fell, Associate Professor Terry Payneau, Matthew Swan, Julian Galvez. There's a special opportunity to see an early design of the seed capsule that hopes to carry seeds to the moon. You can learn more about the QUT lunar testbed, meet the pilots of the drones that are mapping our world-first drone and ground surveys in remote parts of Antarctica. So you can stay on, learn more, ask questions. I really want to acknowledge and thank today's event partners, QUT and the World Science Festival. And finally, thank you to everyone who has joined us here today in person or online. Liam, back in the UK, you can go to bed. Give Matilda a scratch from all of us. And Meganne, we will never forget this morning. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
you.